Hi, so welcome to SAP UI5 tutorial for the beginners. So today in this tutorial, we are going to learn what is the binding in SAP UI5. So for that, let me create a project. So SAP UI5 project, and the name of the project is, let's say, binding or data binding. Okay, so data binding. So next, and here name of the view is test, and then next and finish. Yes, project got created. So if you can see here, so there is a view.xml, there is a controller for this particular view, right? So in this tutorial I'm just going to create one simple form. Okay, so let's say this is a H box. Inside this H box, so the first part of the H box contains the form. Soon after you enter something, so we are going to display the details in the right side. So we are going to create this particular page. Okay, so this form will be having the two buttons, and whenever you click on the button, so we are gonna get the data of this, and then we are gonna display the data in here. Okay, so let's try to create a H box first, and inside this, so let me create a H box. Okay, so H box which is having 100% of width, and then inside this H box we should have the two boxes again. So let me create one more box, so that is V box inside this particular H box, and then let me close the V box. Okay, and then one more V box. That means one H box has two V boxes inside this. Okay, so now what we can do is we can create one simple form. So as we created in the previous tutorial, so we can create one simple form inside this V box. Okay, and then create the content, close the content aggregation, and then can close this. Okay, so now if you can see here, it is saying that what is this F. So F means F is the one which is pointing to a different library in SAP UI5. So for that we have to create two different namespaces. So here, so F is the one which is pointing to this particular library, right? And then this L is the one, it's not there, so we are gonna put L later. Okay, so now we have created a form, and then we have given the ID, or let's say ID my form. Okay, so save this, and we have given the title to this form called registration form. So now let's run this particular project. To run the project, you right click and go here, select the run as, and then select this option. Yes, so if you can see here, so this is now the project is up and running, and this is the output of the page which we created now, right? So go here and refresh this. Okay, so this is the registration form, right? So now go back to the XML file, and in here try to create the registration form the way we created in the last tutorial, right? So what I will do is, so we are going to create the sections first. To create the sections, anyways, core and title, this is the basic information, and then this is the label called name, and the name can be either first name, second name, and then or middle name and the last name, kind of it. Okay, so now you can see here I have created something called as first name in here, second name for one more input field, and third, so this is the last name, one more input field for the last name. So go here and then refresh the browser. You can see there are three input boxes got rendered, right? So now in case if you want to give a value, so since so this SAP UI5 follows MVC design pattern. So what is that MVC design pattern? So MVC means model view controller. So model is the one which is having the data in it, and this model will be binded to this particular view. Okay, so this view will be controlled by the controller. That means there are three different things. So whenever you're trying to deal with any web application, so web application, in the web application the user is gonna give some inputs, and then we are going to control these inputs with the help of the logic, and then so for these inputs will be saved in a single object, so that is called model. Okay, so model is the one. So let me open MS Paint. Okay, so let's say this is the view. Okay, this is the view, and for this entire view we are going to set one model which holds the data of this particular view, and this total thing will be controlled by one controller. Okay, so that means there are three logics. So this is a view which we are seeing over here, and then this is the logic which we are not able to see, but which will run in the background, and then for this logic data is required that the data will be collected from this particular input fields of the page. Okay, so these three logics are different. So now we have, what we did was we created one view, let's say simple view, and for this we need to provide a data, right? So how can we provide the data? So what I will do is, so let me go back to the controller. Okay, so let me go back to the controller. In the controller I will uncomment this onInit method. Okay, so let me create let me create something called as a variable data. Okay, so inside this data what I will do is I will simply create the two fields, the three variables, first name, middle name and last name. So I have a variable called data. So in this particular object I have three attributes, first name, middle name and last name. So these two variables, since we have three input fields, so we are going to have three variables in here in this data. Okay, so this first name, this variable name, and in here this variable name must be equal. Okay, that means what? So I'm going to get this particular value of the input to this particular variable, I mean to this property of this particular object. So and the value of the middle name will be stored in this particular middle name, and the value of the last name, this property will be pointed to this particular thing, right? So now we created a one object with three fields, and we created a view with the three fields, right? So now what we can do is, so let me go to this on after rendering method, and then let me uncomment this. So there is something called as JSON model. Okay, so there is something called as JSON model in SAPUI5. So that is, so okay, so just create an object of a JSON model like this. Okay, just create an object of this particular SAP UI model JSON model, and then you just give this particular data to the model, and then the object of this JSON model we are going to save inside a variable called O model, right? So to set this particular model to the view, so to this particular test view, how can we do? In case if you want to get the view object, we have to get the view object like this dot get view. So we got the view object. To this view we are setting the model dot set model. Okay, we are setting the model. Okay, so we are setting the model. In here this model contains this particular data. This data will be mapped to this particular three input fields, that means first and middle and last. So save this and go back to the browser and then refresh. So now you cannot see any, you are not able to see, I mean you are not seeing any difference over here, right? So in case if you want to see the difference, that means in case if you want to uh, make sure that this is properly binded, so what you do is you go to the controller and give some different values like Seren, okay, and then Kumar, and then finally save this and then go back to the browser and refresh this. See, now you can see I have modified this data and I'm getting all these values into these controls. That means what? We binded all these three properties properly to the view. That means this is the view, and then this is the data which is binded to this particular view, and this view is controlled by this entire controller. Okay, so now we created a view, and then what we did was we mapped all these variables, and we in this particular form we have the three input fields, and for these three input fields we mapped these three properties. So let's continue developing this particular form. Okay, so what I will do is, so I'll create one more section called let's say just create an icon, and after that create a different thing. Okay, so as we discussed in the previous tutorial, let's create a user icon first, and then create a gender, right? And then create a gender label. So let's save this and go back to the browser and refresh the browser in here, so you can see this one, and there is a gender. Yes, there is a gender, and then for the gender we are going to give the radio buttons. Okay, copy this, sorry, uh, go here and then create a radio button group and radio button group. I have two radio buttons. If you can see here, there is a property called selected index. I have given a gender. That means I'm mapping to this particular property of the model, and on select I'm executing something. Okay, so this gender, so if you can see here, gender is some property like this last name. So the way how it is, last name is a property in the object, in the same way gender is a property in the object, and then I'm mapping to this one. So if you can see this one in this controller, so we don't have any gender um, information. So for that, what you do is create a property called gender. Okay, create a property called gender. Okay, so now what you do is, so we created a property called gender and we mapped this gender to this particular radio button. So now go back here and refresh the browser, and you can see this got generated, and then by default female got selected. So if you give the value, to 1, so then obviously, so the male will get it will be get selected. See here, so that means that is depending upon the data. Now what we did was, we created one variable and we mapped this variable to the gender property. Okay, so now let's go ahead with creating this particular form. Okay, we are going to create the date of birth field, right? So go back to the view, and then in here create a one more field called date of birth, and then in here this date of birth is mapped to this particular field. So but we don't have this field inside our the data. So for that, what we have to do is we just create one more property called date of birth. Okay, so see, gender is 0 and 1. So this 0 and 1 does not make sense to the user. So for that, what we need to do is, let's create one more variable called gender text female. So I'm going to explain you this one later. Okay, so we created date of birth and save this and go back to the browser and refresh the browser. You can see date of birth is created in here. Okay, you can select this one, and then accordingly we map this one to this particular field. So next what you do is, you just go ahead with creating or designing the form, I can say. Yeah, so after this, so we have father name and then contact number, right? So now go here and then create one more label called father name and map it to this father name. So obviously you are mapping this particular property, in the sense there should be a property in the model. So for that, what you do is, you have to create one more property inside this particular controller. Okay, father name. In the same way, we have two more fields like contact number and then alternative number. Okay, so create these particular two fields in here. Okay, so here we have created a contact number, and then we mapped this into the contact number property, and then we have created one more label called alternative number, and then in here we have an input field, and this is mapped to alternative number inside this particular object, alternative number property, I can say. Yeah, so just create two more properties inside the object. Okay, save this and then go back to the browser and then refresh this, and you can see all these three. So as of now there is no values, right? So if you see, if you can see here, there is no value. So if you can see here, like if you give a and save this, go back here and refresh this, you can see all these three values in here. See, so that means these are all properly mapped. And if you can see the date of birth, if you give just some value, some dummy value, and then go here, you can see that value in here, right? So let's remove all these values. Okay, so let's remove all these values, make it empty. Now the data binding is proper. So now what you do is create two buttons. Okay, so create two buttons, just save and cancel. Okay, so go back to the view and then here create two buttons. I am creating an empty label just to make sure that it should render in a different line. Okay, I have two buttons, save and cancel, and I have a callback handler for both the buttons. That means save button press and then cancel button press. So now what I will do is, I will copy this, I will go to the controller, and I will create the two methods. Okay, so function, so I have created these two, and then I'll go here, go to this one, create this callback handler inside the controller. Okay, so I have created these two functions, right? So good. So now go back to the browser, and then refresh this. Now you can see the two buttons got rendered. Okay, so now you have to implement the functionality of this. So what is the functionality? So as we discussed earlier here, as we discussed this, so in this particular tutorial we are going to create one H box. Inside this H box we'll be having the two boxes inside this is some form. So whenever you click on this form, we are going to display the entered details in another in here in this particular location. So for that, what we have, so we created one H box. So inside this H box we have the two V boxes. So this V box is empty. So that means what here we need to render this entered information in the next uh, V box, in this particular V box. So for that, so what we have, so let's say, let's give the ID of this, and then so initially make it, so let's give the ID to this. So like, this is this student, this is the ID of this container, and then make it invisible by default. Okay, so now what you do is, so whichever the fields you are going to enter, so how many fields are there? So here name, gender, and 1 2 3 4 5 6. So you are going to display 6 details in here. For that, what you do is, so create 6 fields in here. Okay, so I have created one H box in here, and then justify content center, and then inside this first name, and in here where I'm going to display the first name. That means what, whichever the name in here, I'm going to map the same name to this particular value. Okay, so let's make it visible first, and then see how it's gonna display. Okay, so refresh this, and if you can see here, see, this is how it is, right? So if you can see here, so this is mapped to first name. So you go to this controller and go here. So first name is Seren, and this one is Kumar, and this one is this, right? So that is the reason you are able to see this particular first name. If you refresh now, so there won't be any values, right? So if you change and if you click on this, then obviously you will change this one in here. Okay, so now design the same. So design the same form. So in here I have one H box. In the H box I'm just rendering the first name, and in here I'm just displaying the value which is entered by the user. So in the same way, try to create all the 6 fields. So what are all the 6 fields? So the next one is, the middle name, right? And the next one is the last name, and and then gender. Okay, gender, and then go here, and then what is the date of birth, and then father's name, right? So create a father name, and then create what is that, contact number, and then one more thing, alternative number. Okay, save this and go back to the screen, and then refresh. So you can see all these got created in here. So now by default we need to make it visible, or so let's say don't make it visible or something, so let it invisible or something, so keep it as it is. So now what we can do is, so let me go back to the browser. Okay, so once we click on the save button, okay, so once we click on the save button, so let's say I entered something, if I click on the save button, so you are going to display C. So soon after I change the values, so the values are getting changed in here, right? So if I enter the father name, if I enter this and this, right? So what if I click on cancel? If I click on cancel, then obviously all the values should be empty, right? So all the values should become empty. So for that, so there is a callback handler for this. So what we can do is, for by default we can hide this. Okay, so by default what we can do is, so this is the V box, so make it false. Okay, so once the user enters, the total, once the user enters and he clicks on the save button, then only make this particular V box visible. Okay, so for that, what we have is we have something called as callback handler. This is save button. So what we do is, in case if you want to get that particular object, or in case if you want to get the VBox, so this dot get you, it will give you this particular object by ID. You can give the ID, it will give you the VBox, and then in here you can make this VBox, visible. Okay, so this you are gonna get this particular VBox and set visible to true in here. So then obviously, so this will be like, it will be visible. Okay, so now just to execute, to test this particular scenario, go here. See, now it is invisible. So what I'll do is I'll just simply enter the value. Let's say Saran Kumar and male, and date of birth is like, let's say something. Okay, so father's name, let's say ABC, and then contact number. You can also, you can enter anything, and you can enter anything. Okay, so there is no restriction. You can also validate the data maybe later. So as of now I didn't validating this. So when I click on this, so you can see I'm displaying all the things in here. So since last name is not here, so last name, you can see the last name. So whenever you click on this cancel, obviously we need to make this total form empty. So for that, what we need to do is, let's go back to the callback handler of cancel button. So whenever we click on the cancel button, so we are going to execute this particular method. So in this method, right, in this method, create the same object. Okay, this dot data. Okay, so this dot data, so what you can do is, this dot data, this dot data is empty. Okay, okay, so what you can do is, let's get this particular data. Okay, go back, where is this, go back to this controller, and then get the view and get the model and set the data. Okay, set the data here. So this dot data, so what will happen if you set the data, right? So let's go here and then refresh this. It is empty now. So now say array n, and then KUMAR and mail. Let's select something and then click on save. So you are going to display all these details. So if you click on cancel, so if you can see, it's not resetting this one. So for that, what we need to do is we need to make all these values to empty, right? So that means copy this and then paste it in here. Okay, paste it in here. This dot data equals, so you are making all these values empty again, right? Save this. Now the data will be reset. So go here and refresh this. So now again test this application. Saran, okay, and the middle name is Kumar. Let's go to this one. Last name is Reddy. Then let's select some value, some, let's say some a, some, let's say this, and then click on save. So you can see all this data visible over here. If you click on cancel, see, now it is reset to this. So this is how we are going to play with, data binding. So this is called data binding. Data binding in the sense, so you are creating a model, and inside that model you are going to keep some data, and you are going to bind this data to this particular view. So that, so whenever you click on this, you can get all this information in a single object, and it is very handy to send the data to the backend, right? So what I did in here in this particular thing, so I created one object. So in this object, so depending upon my input fields, right? So depending upon my input fields, so I have those so let's say if I have 5 input fields, so you can have either five properties in the object. You can have multiple properties also. It is not mandatory that if you have only 5 fields and you should have only 5 properties. You can have as many properties as you want. Okay, so then once you are ready with the data, then create the JSON model. So JSON model, and then set the model to this particular view. So this is how we are going to set model to this particular view. Once you set the view, once you set model to the view, so then in the view you are going to map all these properties of that particular object like this. So since it is an object, right, since it is an object in here, right, so you're going to map these properties of the object like this. So this value is like this. That means what, this particular first name will be mapped to this input field. At the same time, this middle name will be mapped to this middle name inside an object, right? So like this, there are it is It is depending upon your requirement. So depending upon your requirement, you can create the forms and you can create a model out of that and then map this model to the view, and then accordingly data will be rendered. So this is about the MVC architecture of SAP UI5 application. Okay, so model view controller. So model is the one which is having the data in it. So view is the one which we can see in the browser, and then the controller is a logic. It's kind of a JSON, JavaScript logic using which we can control the data and the visibility of the view and everything. Okay, so thanks for watching. So let's meet in the next tutorial.